All right, Grand Risings, welcome to the Sequoia National Forest. I'm at an elevation of about 6,000 feet, well beyond where it usually gets snow. You know what, first and foremost, I'd like to apologize for that obnoxious noise that you might hear in the background. I just so happen to be here at the same time where they got tree trimming crews doing some service up here. And I'm gonna talk about why they're up here as we get further into this episode. I'm gonna talk about a lot of stuff as we get further in the episode. But so, I mean, like, if you look at this, I mean, it looks really, really nice. I mean, when you think of a forest up in the mountains, I mean, this is probably what you envision in your head if you've never been to a high elevation forest or a mountain forest or something like that. It's got some trees. It's got a nice species richness of trees, at least 4 dominant tree species here. And I'm gonna talk about each one of those too later. And you got some other species of trees too that have found their niches in some of the micro habitats that are found up here. Today's going to be an episode about trees and forest ecology. So if you find that boring, just go, switch over to whatever other YouTube videos that you look at, like shoes you can't afford or some shit. Anyway, so if you didn't know any better and at first glance you came out here and you saw this, you might be thinking to yourself, wow, look at this nature. So beautiful. God's creation is so magnificent. Look what it looks like to be in a place that hasn't been touched by humans. All these lush trees, all this nature. It's amazing. But if I was to hear you say that, I would already automatically know that you're not an ecologist, let alone not a scientist at that. Because it's apparent that you don't know what the hell you're looking at. If you notice the widths of all these trunks, they're pretty much relatively around the same width. Average width of all these trees, even amongst heterospecifics, that means different species of trees, they're roughly the same width, and also they're roughly the same height. And that's because about 60, 70 years ago, I believe, this whole area out here was logged. And I guess if you live in anywhere in California and you had your house built within like the 60s and 70s, more than likely your wood from your house came from this forest. But anyway, that's the real story. This place was logged 70 years ago. They stopped logging, and all these trees grew back. How do I know how old these trees are? Well, I looked at some that were cut down, and I counted the rings and estimated them to be about 70 years. Yeah, so we got about 4 major species of tree here. 3 of them you could probably consider dominant, like they make up most of the tree biomass in this area. And then one of them is still pretty common, but I don't know if I would necessarily call it a dominant. You also got this understory of young saplings from other trees and seeds that have been dispersed. And if you catch little clips of this video, you might be able to see falling seeds actually falling from the tree. And also this undergrowth is kind of a good indication of how young this forest is, because the previous undergrowth, when this forest was still primary meaning like humans haven't affected it or haven't impacted it at all, you wouldn't see anything like this. You'd probably see a much more diverse forest floor, different plants. I mean, right here you can see that these saplings right here are essentially the same species as these large trees right here, and they're recruiting the once bare forest floor that became bare after logging activities, and they're trying to recruit, grow more trees, grow themselves essentially, and establish a primary ecosystem once again. But that's going to take hundreds of years, to be honest. Like all these little saplings right here, they're not all going to grow up. They're all competing with each other for the same resources. So only 1 or 2, actually maybe even 1 in this spot is only going to survive and become a large tree like this. And these aren't even the biggest that these can get. Some of these cedars and some of these firs, they can have huge diameters if you go to a primary forest. What we're sitting in right now is something called a secondary growth forest, because it had been logged, and 70 years ago when it got logged, and once the logging stopped, they let this forest to grow back, and it has grown back successfully. However, since this forest was previously logged and all they left were stumps, that kind of tweaked the ecology of the area a little bit, actually maybe even a lot. And it affects this forest mainly when forest fires come through. if a forest fire burns through a secondary growth forest, it kind of has a somewhat of a different effect. And that's kind of why I'm here doing this episode, because we got this kind of, you know, real green, you know, vegetated, somewhat vegetated area, not too vegetated, but somewhat vegetated area. And then recently, within the last month, the fire had came through here and burnt up a large section of it. This section's not really burnt right here, but I'm gonna show you more burnt sections as we get further into this episode. If you don't know already, fire is a thing that's been around on this planet way before humans. Humans did not create fire. Fire has been here. And over the eons, over the millions, hundreds of millions of years, different tree species had evolved these adaptations to basically cope with fire. They've evolved adaptive mechanisms that allow their species to basically come back once everything gets burnt up. Okay, so as far as tree species go, one of the dominants we got right here is this one. This is a fir tree. And then we got that light yellow one because it's going through its senescence right now. Senescence is when tree leaves start dying off and falling to the forest floor. Anyway, that's black oak. And then the major dominant that we got right here is this one in front of me and that one back there. That is called Incense Cedar. And then we also have a species of pine here, and I don't see a big one in the vicinity. But let me show you the differences between each one.
Oh, look at my little example array that I have here. Isn't this nice and organized?
All right, we'll start off with, so I have different foliages of the different trees here to give you an example of how to tell the difference between certain species of high elevation forest trees. So the first one we got right here, this is a fir tree. These are fir tree foliage, and you see like the leaves, they're, I guess, what do they call it? Somewhat pinnate, alternate, kind of flat, spiny foliage. This is basically what your Christmas tree is. I think Christmas trees are Douglas fir. I don't think these are the same species as Douglas fir. But yeah, fir trees have these kind of like horizontally placed, somewhat pinnate leaves. And then we have the pine. So pine needles almost exclusively look like this. They're kind of bunched up in these little bundles. I'm pretty sure there's a scientific term for that. And a way you can tell the species when you don't have any cones to look at is how many spines there are per node, essentially. So pine needles look like that. And then this is how you can really tell the species of what pine you look at. If you have an example of a cone, now this one's long and skinny, and you can be able to tell the species of pine tree that are around you by the cones that are left on the ground. They're easy to pick up. Sometimes, depending on where you're at, you're allowed to take them home as a souvenir. But yeah, pine cones can tell you what species of tree that you want to know, essentially. And then looking over here, we got this example. This is incense cedar. And you notice that these leaves, this foliage, is pretty distinctly shaped. And incense cedars, which I think they're not technically cedars. I think they're really junipers. I don't think there's that many native cedars in North America. But yeah, this is what the foliage look like. And then the seeds for this thing, where is it? Oh, here we go. All right, so these are the fruit capsules. So once it has its inflorescence, which it doesn't have flowers, it's a gymnosperm, which means it's cone bearing. So I guess this is a cone right here. And these cones, once they're fully developed inside, you can see that there's that seed. That one's a failed seed. You can see it's got some fungus on it, but hold on. And if you can see right there, that seed that's in there, it has evolved a structure that allows it to basically disperse when it falls. As it falls, it moves. It doesn't just fall straight down. That little wing on that seed allows it to basically move horizontally as it falls from those cones. Let me pull that up for you so it looks better. That other example is a poor example. But here's the seeds, and you can see right there that they have that little wing. So when the seed falls out of the cone, it basically spins around, and it can move horizontally instead of just straight down. Because that's the point of dispersal. You want to kind of get away from your parents, you know, so you can grow and establish, make a home somewhere else. All right, yeah, so that's the incense cedar. By the way, the pines, they pretty much do the same thing. The seeds will be
in these little grooves right here. And as you can tell, this cone is spent. It's already, you know, dropped all of its seeds and everything. But kind of the same concept, except this is just a much bigger cone, much more productive seed maker, I guess. All right, so and the last species of dominant tree, we have an example of the foliage here. Deciduous foliage, meaning like it starts growing and starts having its bud burst, usually in the spring when the months start warming up. And then right now in the fall, you know, they fall off the tree because temperatures getting colder. The tree's metabolism isn't going to be as efficient as during warmer temperatures. So you don't really need leaves. But yeah, this is a Quercus, a black oak. I forget the species, but it's in the genus Quercus. And yeah, deciduous tree. So yeah, 1 deciduous tree and 3 evergreen trees. Actually, you have 3 gymnosperm trees, which are in an evolutionary perspective more primitive than these leafy ones right here. This is actually an angiosperm. So these trees produce flowers, whereas gymnosperms, they produce cones. And these oaks, they don't produce cones, they produce acorns. And I don't really see any acorns around here. So I apologize, I cannot show you an example of what an acorn looks like, but you know, if you're watching this, that means you have the internet, so you can kind of go look it up for yourself. Okay, so already we can see with these different types of trees, we can see different adaptations, you know, because they all live here in the same place. They're all taking advantage of the same, you know, microclimate that you would find in these high elevation mountains. And they all have to deal with the same soil, which is somewhat of a derivative of this rock, which is a granite type rock. The entire Sierra Nevada is made out of rock like this. And, you know, that obviously adds to the soil chemistry, and plus all the other biomass that's falling down here, accumulating, degrading, and being eaten up by fungus and other microbes, and adding more nutrients to the soil. And then you got these new growth taking advantage of all those nutrients. So these different species have evolved different lifestyles in order to adapt to this certain type of climate. Like you have this black oak, it's deciduous, it drops its leaves, so it really doesn't have to function biologically or ecologically during cold months. So it can just kind of stay dormant, and all it has to do really is maintain its space. These other species of evergreen trees, you know, they stay green basically all year long, even when it's snowing, even when they're covered with snow. So they're photosynthesizing all the time. They're using up energy all the time. And that kind of makes sense, because this is what you see. You see a lot of these, you know, and that's kind of like a primitive reproductive strategy. Just produce as many gametes, as many offspring as you can. You know, you have all those seeds just kind of spreading everywhere, get in where you fit in type of thing. The oaks kind of have a different strategy, because their acorns, they have a lot of starch in it. There's a lot of nutrients in them. So they've actually evolved a close relationship with a lot of animals, particularly squirrels and jays and other birds and woodpeckers that eat acorns. You know, acorn is a really highly nutritious source of food, and animals will take them, eat them, store them to be eaten later. Sometimes squirrels will bury them in a cache and forget about them, and then there you go, they just got planted by something. So they use animals to disperse, whereas these gymnosperms, they probably evolved before mammals even existed. So the only thing they could rely on their dispersal is literally like the wind and gravity. So I mentioned that this place, these species here that have evolved here have evolved mechanisms to deal with forest fires. Fire is a part of the ecology. It doesn't happen too often, but it does happen. And it's happened often enough throughout the eons that these species that have evolved here adapted to the chances of fire coming around. And a lot of those adaptations come within the shapes of these trees. I mean, you notice if you go to the forest and stuff like pine forest, you notice that the overall shape of the trees is conical. It's kind of like a triangular cylinder and everything. It's like skinny at the top, wide at the bottom. And the point of that is as wherever the fire starts, as it's moving through, if this was a primary rainforest, or if this was a primary forest, you would have all this vegetation here. It'd be much bigger. That fire is going to burn up all that vegetation and all that lower foliage too. And as heat rises,
if you're a tree trying to avoid further fire damage, you don't want to have a lot of foliage up at the high canopy because that's obviously going to get burnt. But if you skinny your foliage towards the top, that heat can just basically pass through the canopy of the forest and get released into the atmosphere. And you basically get to save a bunch of your pine needles, a bunch of your leaves, so that when the fire's over, you can continue going back to metabolizing, going back to photosynthesizing and creating sugars from that carbon dioxide. And that fire that just burnt is adding more carbon dioxide. So it's kind of like a boost to recovery and everything. The oak trees have a somewhat of a different strategy. Oak trees usually grow pretty slow, and usually oak trees have really hard, dense wood. So you know, their body essentially is kind of well built to withstand fire. Not saying that these gymnosperms don't have that too, because there are plenty of gymnosperms. If you ever see like the giant sequoias in Sequoia National Park, you'll see a bunch of them that have been burned from previous fires, even prehistoric fires that have came through, but they still survived even since then. But yeah, the oaks usually are hardwooded. I don't know if these black oaks are hardwooded. I might be bullshitting you on that, but yeah, they have different strategies of surviving. All right, you can see in this burnt area right here. So I guess firefighters came through and cut a lot of these dead trees, and they got to pull these trees out because, you know, we're living in the Anthropocene, which means, you know, we humans, which have basically self-proclaimed us as the most dominant species and the most successful species on this earth. Although I think that's a load of bull. We have to take responsibility essentially, and we have to manage natural resources because, you know, living in this day and age, the human expansion into natural areas is just growing. It's just growing. And, you know, people want to move out here to places like this, which can be beautiful, but they kind of don't understand that, you know, it's a rough place out here and it can be very dangerous. So we realize that because we've done science and we've done the research as humans. And we found that, you know, like these dead trees, they can serve as effective fuel that can keep a forest fire going. So they cut the dead trees down and then they come out here and remove them. If you're an ecologist, you might think, damn, why do that? Why not just let the tree, you know, the fallen tree just kind of like die and decay? Because, you know, that gives nutrients to the fungus and termites and other detritivores and utilize their ecological function. So they would decay these logs, send those nutrients into the soil, and then those nutrients would then essentially be traded off from fungus to tree into these live trees through the mycelium network. That's like the internet before the internet existed. So this is a spot that actually didn't get burnt too bad, you know. And you can see right here, like what I was saying about the shapes of those trees. See, like real skinny at the top, and this one, since the fire went through, all its lower branches got burnt out. But because they're skinny at the top, leaving more space at the top for heat to exit through, you know, they save their top foliage, and the tree won't die. It still has green leaves, which can photosynthesize and make food for itself and continue to grow. And you can see that all the trees here, or all the evergreen trees, all the gymnosperms, essentially have that shape. I mean, right there, that's a fir tree, skinny at the top. That right there, that looks like an incense cedar, again, skinny at the top. The only ones that don't look like that are the oaks, but again, they have a different strategy of survival. Hey, you can see this this soil right here, because all the ash came down, and there's a rainstorm that came through here too, and basically turned this soil into something really slick. And you got this old pickup truck that looks like it kind of slid slowly down until it hit that tree right there. All the tires got burnt up and melted. All right, so here we go. It's a good example of some burnt out tree stumps. That tree doesn't look that old, but it was cut and it got burnt during the fire. But right here, this probably was a position of an older tree, maybe during the days when this was a primary rainforest, and it got burnt out pretty bad. You can see like it created this somewhat cavity, and because the roots basically got burnt, because it was dry wood to begin with. So once this area burnt up, once the fire came through,
that was all fuel that is underground. So stuff is burning underground. And because that was dead wood to begin with, and termites went through it, and you know, it was being basically consumed by detritivores, it creates all these like holes and makes it real porous, so oxygen gets in there, and which allows it to burn even more efficiently. And you know, if you know what tree roots look like, sometimes they have little branches of the tree roots that you know, go out horizontally. And those tree roots, if you've ever owned a house, you know, sometimes those tree roots can go under your house. And if it's a dry tree root system, man, it might burn your house from the bottom up. Although I don't think that's what happened here, but it definitely doesn't help. You know, these old tree stumps don't help don't help maintain a home out here. Remnant stumps from the old primary rainforest that were left here from the loggers, that basically tweaked the ecology, the fire ecology of this area. So if a new fire comes through here burning the secondary growth, it's gonna burn hotter and more intense. And with humans, it's also gonna do that more frequently, because humans cause fires. You know, I mean, fires can be caused by other means, like lightning strikes and even like supreme heat or whatnot. But humans are likely gonna be the source of most of the fires that we're gonna see in the future. And that's your future ecology right there. Oh yeah, look at, real slushy. Real nasty, muddy. When it gets real wet, it's like slime, no lie, seriously. But again, because that undergrowth layer got burnt up, so there's nothing stabilizing the soil anymore. You got this ash layer that built up on it, and then coming rainstorms, it's more than likely gonna erode really quick. And that's why big trees are important. Bigger trees have bigger root systems. Bigger root systems are better at stabilizing the soil, better at preventing erosion. You take out those big trees, you take out a lot of that erosion prevention function. And you gotta wait however many centuries for these trees to basically retake up that large tree niche. Isn't it somewhat ironic that after a fire, usually one of the things that are left standing is the fireplace? Yeah, more destruction footage to show you that is caused by wildfires here in California. Unlike the trees, homes are not built to survive fires. At least like older homes aren't built that way. I mean, there are some newer homes that they look miraculous, like look like the fire didn't even kiss it, but everything around it is burnt. But in this case, this house is pretty old, so it's gone. But you notice the trees around it are still here. And some of them are still alive at the top with nice, well, not nice, but like some green foliage so it can photosynthesize it and continue surviving and grow bigger and hopefully reestablish the primary rainforest condition that was here to begin with. I wonder if they had any coughing in that. Yeah. Who keeps a wheelbarrow next to a, wait, what is that? Is that like a furnace or is that even a chimney? No, that's like a kitchen, isn't it? Like a wood burning stove kitchen? Oh, that makes sense. You got the wheelbarrow to carry the wood into the, it's funny, it looks like there was wood in that wheelbarrow and it burned in the wheelbarrow and not in the fireplace. Yeah, see, like big trees, all gone. All that's left is the cavities that they once filled in with their root systems that got burnt away by this fire. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Yeah, I wonder how much money it costs to live up here. You know, how much money did you spend purchasing this property? Like even back in the day, even if you inherited this property from like your great grandfather or whatever, like what's the equivalent that they paid for this land? Like what would that be worth today? And since it burnt down, how much did you lose? And how much does your insurance cost? Anyway, yeah, here we go. Fire ecology, a perfect example of fire ecology and how humans still have yet to learn nature and still continue to ignore it for the purpose of being somewhere exclusive, which is funny because I guess you trade exclusivity for danger and major loss, apparently. I mean, I don't know. These probably the people who probably live up here and own these properties, they probably don't live here full time. You know, this is probably like their vacation / summer cabin home, where they throw eyes wide shut parties or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, again, like you can see the trees here. Look at the top of the canopy, still relatively intact. Some of them are charred, dead leaves. But I would imagine that a lot of the vascular tissue is saved and maintained. So, you know, those leaves up at the top can still photosynthesize and still allow the tree to live. Oh, look, it's Cyanosittus stelleri. Steller's jay, Corvidae, related to crows, ravens, and jays. Anyway, hey, look what we got here. Oh, the pride. The pride is so thick right now. Yeah, you lost your property, but you still got your pride. America. They can take my property. They can't take my pride. Besides, I got 3 more properties anyway.